Okay, so today's lesson, lesson 8, is on the matrix inverses. Now, keep in mind that in the past, when we were solving to find different values of variables algebraically, remember to solve an addition equation, remember we used the inverse property, which was subtraction. So we can use that same idea that we're going to use an inverse to solve a matrix. Now, also keep in mind that when you are multiplying a number by its inverse, and the inverse of 4 would be 1/4, anytime you multiply a number by its inverse, you get 1, which is the identity. So this is how we're all going to tie in this matrix inverse, is we're going to be multiplying or including, we're going to augment our matrix and add in the identity matrix. So here's how we're going to do this. My first example, this is my given matrix. To find the inverse, and when we write our answer, the inverse is always written as to the -1 power. So we're looking to find the inverse of A. And the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to take my original matrix, the 1, the -1, the 2, and the 0, and right next to it, I am going to write the identity matrix for a 2x2. And if you recall, the identity matrix is the 1, and then a 0 here, and then a 0 and a 1. Remember, you're trying to get the 1s down the diagonal and then replace all the other numbers with 0s. So our goal here is to take our matrix A, which is on the left, and our identity matrix, which is on the right, and we're going to transform A so it becomes the identity, and then on the right side of this gray line will be the inverse of A. So we're going to basically apply those same rules of dividing and then multiplying and adding to transform the left side of that gray line into the identity matrix. So let's go ahead and try this. So again, I'm going to try to get a 1 in the top position, which is already there. So let me highlight this in red. So it's already done for me. So then the next number that I need to work on is the 2. I need to transform this 2 and make it become a 0. So remember, you take your pivot row, which is row 1. I'm going to multiply row 1 by -2, and then I'm going to add it to row 2 to get my new row 2. So row 1, once I multiply it by -2, I get -2, +2, -2, and 0. I'm going to add that to row 2. And this will give me my new row 2. I'm going to rewrite row 1. 1, 1, -1, 1, and 0. My new row 2. Again, I'm still trying to transform that left side of that gray line into the identity matrix. Remember, when you're working down the columns, you take care of the 1s first. Notice column 1 is complete. I have the 1 in the top and then the 0 below it. The next thing I need to fix is the 1 in the second column. I need to change that 2 and make it become a 1. Remember, to change a number into a 1, we divide. So I'm going to divide row 2 by 2. This will give me my new row 2. So I'm going to write row 2 down here. And then I'm going to show that I'm dividing each one of the elements by 2. This will give me 0, 1, -1, and then +1/2. This is my new row 2. I'm going to rewrite row 1, my new row 2, and then show the dividing line. I still do not have the identity matrix on that left side yet. I still have one more step. I need to change the -1 right here into a 0. And the way that I will accomplish that is by taking row 2 and adding it to row 1. Now, essentially, if you want to stay consistent and think, well, whenever I make something a 0, I have to multiply first, we could say, well, we're going to multiply row 2 by 1 and then add it to row 1, giving me my new row 1. You don't really have to show that you're multiplying it by 1, but if you always want to remember that to make something a 0, you multiply and then add. So I'm going to go ahead and take my row 2, which is 0, 1, -1, positive half, and I'm going to be adding that to row 1, and I get 1, 0, 0, positive half. That is now my new row 1, 1, 0, 0, 1 half. And my row 2 is the same. And now notice, to the left of your gray bar, or your gray line, I now have the identity matrix over here, and now what results over here is the inverse. So the inverse of A, the inverse matrix, is 0, 1 half, -1, positive half. That is the inverse matrix for your original A. We're going to try another one, another 2 by 2. Then we will do an example of a 3 by 3, and then you can start your homework. So the next one, again, take your original matrix, write the identity next to it, so I have my original on the left and the identity on the right. Again, this is our augmented matrix. We now need to transform and make the left side the identity, and then the right side will become the inverse. So again, I'm going to take care of this first element up here, the 3. I need to transform it to a 1. So I'm going to take row 1, I'm going to divide it by 3, and it will become my new row 1. So let me rewrite all of row 1, show that I'm dividing each one of the elements by 3. So I get 1, -1/3, +1/3, and 0. This is my new row 1. I'm going to rewrite row 2. I now need to make that -5 become a 0. So this is what I'm working on next. Again, I take my pivot row. I'm in row 1. I'm in column 1, so I use row 1 still. So I'm going to multiply row 1 by 5. And I'm going to add it to row 2, giving me my new row 2. So row 1, once I multiply it by 5, I get 5, -5/3, +5/3, and 0. I will add that to row 2. I get 0. So now I need to do -5/3 plus 2 over 1, common denominator here. I could make this this is a 3, sorry, 5 over 3. Common denominator is 3, so this will become 6 over 3, and negative 5 over 3. So once I add that, I get 1/3. Over here is 5/3 and then 1. Go ahead and erase the work here. All right, so that is my new row 2. So row 1 is still the 1, the negative 1/3, positive 1/3, and 0. 0, 1/3, 5/3, and 1. So now I need to get rid of the 1/3. I need to make this become a 1. So I'm going to multiply or divide by 1/3, which is really multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply row 2 by 3, which is divide by 1/3. And that'll give me my new row 2. So once I multiply that, it's really 3 times all of these. So I get 0, 1, 5, and 3. Row 1 is the same. Row 2 is the 0, 1, 5, and 3. I still have one more thing to fix before it becomes the identity. I need to take care of that negative 1/3. So I'm going to multiply row 2 by 1/3 and add it to row 1. This will give me my new row 1. So 1/3 times row 2 is going to give me 0, 1/3, 5/3, and 1. I'm adding it to row 1, which is 1, negative 1/3, positive 1/3, and 0. And I get 1, 0. I get 6 over 3, which is 2, and then the 1. So my new row 1 is 1, 0, 2, 1. My row 2 is the same. I now have my identity matrix on the left and my inverse matrix on the right. So a to the negative 1, indicating it's the inverse of a, is 2, 1, 5, 3. And that is your inverse matrice. Now going to do a little bit more complicated one, a 3 by 3. However, the process is still the same. We're going to write the identity matrix next to it, and then from there, start our row transformations. So again, I'm going to add in, let me go ahead and color code it for you. So maybe it'll be a little bit easier to see what I'm doing here. So the first row I'll do in red, 2, negative 2, positive 2, 4, 1, 0, 0. Then row 2 will be negative 3, 4, 5, 0, 1, 0. And then the last row, 1, 0, 2, 0, 0, 1. So again, our goal is to get the left side of that gray line to turn into the identity matrix. So again, first number I need to take care of is changing this negative 2 to make it become a 1. So I'm going to take row 1 and I'm dividing it by 2, negative 2. And that will give me my new row 1. So this will now give me, so let me just write it here, negative 2, 2, 4, 1, 0, 0. Divide them all by negative 2. And I get 1, negative 1, negative 2, negative half, 0, and 0. That is my new row 1. I'm going to rewrite the blue and the green, rows 2 and row 3. Just so we don't lose our place of what we're doing here. All right, so now the next thing I need to take care of are the zeros down the column. So I'm going to take care of the -3 first. So I need to change this -3 into a 0. So I'm going to multiply row 1 by 3, add it to row 2, which gives me my new row 2. So row 1 multiplied by +3 gives me 3, -3, -6, -3 halves, 0, and 0. I'll write row 2 underneath here. I'm going to add them. And I get 0, 1, -1, -3 halves, 1, and 0. This is now my new row 2. I'm going to rewrite row 1. Rewrite the new row 2, or fill in the new row 2. I'm going to rewrite row 3. Show my dividing line here. All right. I still have one more element to fix in column 1. I now need to work on the green 1. I need to make that a 0. So again, I'm still using row 1 as my pivot. I'm going to multiply row 1 by -1. Add that to row 3. That will give me my new row 3. So row 1 multiplied by -1 gives me -1, +1, 2, +1/2, 0, and 0. Row 3, I'm going to rewrite it underneath. Now I can add them up. And I get 0, 1, 4, 1/2, 0, and 1. This is my new row 3. Let me rewrite row 1. Rewrite row 2. I didn't change anything there yet. And now the new row 3 that I just calculated. All right, column 1 is complete. Now I shift to column 2. Always take care of the 1s first. However, the 1 is already fixed for us. So now I can either fix the red -1 or the green +1. It doesn't matter which you do first, but you must take care of the 1s first. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of the red first. So I'm going to take row 2. I'm going to times it by 1 and then add it to row 1. So essentially I'm just adding rows 2 and row 1. So row 2 is 0, 1, -1, -3 halves, 1, and 0. I'm going to add that to row 1, which is 1, -1, -2, -1/2, 0, 0. This now gives me 1, 0, -3, -2, 1, and 0. That is my new row 1. 1, 0, -3, -2, 1, and 0. My row 2 is the same still. I now need to fix the green. Let me go ahead and just fill it in. All right, I'm now fixing this green one. It needs to become a 0. I'm taking row 2. I'm going to multiply it by -1 and add it to row 3 to get my new row 3. So row 2, 0, -1, +1, +3/2, -1, and 0. Adding it to the current row 3, giving me 0, 0, 5, 2, -1, +1. So I'm rewriting row 1, rewriting row 2, filling in the new row 3. I'm still not done. I'm done with column 1 and column 2. Now I need to work on column 3. Again, take care of the 1 first. So this 5 needs to become a 1. Again, remember to change something in your matrices to a 1. We're dividing. So I'm going to divide row 3 by 5. So 0, 0, 5, 2, -1, 1. Divide all these by 5. And my new row 3 is 0, 0, 1, 2/5, -1/5, +1/5. So now, rewrite 1, 0, -3, -2, 1, 0, 0, 1, -1, -3/2, 1 and 0, 0, 0, 1, 2/5, -1/5, +1/5. And here's my dividing line. I now need to make that -1 in column 3 a 0 and the -3 in column 3 a 0. First thing I'm going to do is the -1. So I'm going to take row 3, multiply it by 1, add it to row 2. Gives me my new row 2. So row 3, 0, 0, 1, 2/5, -1/5, 1/5, adding it to row 2. So 0, 1, 0. Let me show the math over here. So I'm doing 2/5 minus 3/2. I need to get a common denominator, which is 10. So this will become times by 2, that's 4/10, times by 5, -15/10. So this will actually give me -11/10. And then -1/5 added to 1. I'm going to change the whole number 1 into 5/5. And this gives me 4/5. And then 1/5 plus 0 is just 1/5. This is my new row 2. So row 1, still the same. Row 2, in blue, -11/10, 4/5, 1/5. Green is done. All right, one last piece. Got to fix that -3. So again, I'm going to multiply my pivot row, which is 3. So row 3 times 3 Add that to row 1, resulting in my new row 1. So row 3 multiplied by 3 gives me 0, 0, 3, 6/5, -3/5, and then +3/5. I'm adding that to 1, 0, -3, -2, 1, and 0. 1, 0, 0. So 6/5 minus 2/1. Common denominator here is 5. This will become -10/5. When I subtract that, I get -4/5. And then when I do this one, -3/5 plus 1, I can change the 1 into 5/5, which is 2/5. And then 3/5 plus 0 is 3/5. That is my new row 1. 1, 0, 0, -4/5, 2/5, 3/5. The blue row stayed the same. 4/5, 1/5. Green stayed the same. 0, 0, 1. 2/5, -1/5, and 1/5. 4/5 didn't show up. Show my gray dividing line. I now have the identity matrix on the left, and my inverse matrix is on the right. So a to the -1, or the inverse of a, is equal to -4/5, 2/5, 3/5, -11/10, 4/5, 1/5, 2/5, -1/5, 1/5, enclosed in the brackets. And that is how you find the inverse of a matrix. You do have homework on this due tomorrow. The problems are 11 through 21 odd. You also have the chapter review that is posted. I highly recommend that if you finish this and you do have time to get started on it. And then Wednesday in class, I will work out any problems you need to see. And again, your test is Thursday. It is the non-calculator portion. There are 9 questions. And then on Friday will be the calculator portion. And you'll have about 15 minutes. So my advice to you is practice with your calculator. Make sure that you understand how to enter a matrix quickly so you can find the determinant. So that is it for 9-8.